What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. In this video, it's finally time to do a suspension review. So I've had my current setup on the Jeep for about 3 months now, 7,300 miles, both on-road and off-road. Most of you guys know that, 3 months ago, I was preparing for the Powerstop Trail to Sema, did a bunch of suspension upgrades. We changed pretty much the entire suspension, went with the 7-slot Customs 3-link front and rear, the Teraflex Falcon adjustable shocks, the Antirocks front and rear, Locked Offroad bump stops a while back, and the Kralwer triple rate coils. Now, each of those items I did do a video on. We did the install review, and I kind of went in depth on why, you might want some of these certain components, but I've yet to do a video talking about how the Jeep works with all of it. How is the current suspension setup working off-road? Do I like it? What am I going to change? And, kind of wrap it all up so we can continue moving on to new projects. Let's get started. So I kind of went through everything that is currently on the Jeep. Right now, the lift height. That is one of my most common questions I get asked on Instagram, Facebook, email, YouTube. Everybody wants to know what lift kit I'm running and how tall the Jeep is. And as you can tell, it's not really a lift kit. It's a mix of various components. A lot of different companies, different parts, and some of them are like the 3-link. It's a complete DIY thing. For some people, that might be out of the option. They can't weld. So boom, there you go. You can't do it. However, I will say that this current setup works really well, and we'll dive into that in a minute. So lift height. I am running the Kralwer 3.5-inch triple rate springs. Due to the 1-ton swap truss kits, the spring actually sits a little higher than factory. So while I am running 3.5-inch springs, I'm close to right around 4 inches of lift. That's why it looks a little taller. Now the rear does sag down a little bit towards the rear, and that's something I'm gonna change. That's mostly due to the rear truss that actually sits a little lower on the tube. So in the rear it squats down a hair. It's not a fault from the Kralwer springs, it's just the way the 1-ton swap truss kits are kind of designed and made. So for the rear, I'll either swap it out for a 4.5-inch coil or maybe just add a spacer. So another question I get asked all the time is, is a multi-rate coil spring worth it? There's a lot of different options. Kralwer has the triple rate, Metal Cloak has the dual rate, and then there's a lot of companies that either offer progressive or just your standard springs. From what I've noticed, the main benefit of having, whether it's a dual rate spring or a triple rate spring, is when you're really flexed out. That extra stack of tightly wound coils at the top are what help your spring stay put and it doesn't become loose. I actually do have an issue in the rear. Since I have so much down travel, my rear coil spring is actually loose. And a few times on the Powerstop Trail to Sema trip, I actually had to high lift the back of the Jeep up and recenter that spring just because it kept falling out. So that is one thing I will have to change very soon. Not sure how we'll do it, either with coil spring retainers or maybe a longer coil spring, or limit some of the travel. But sometimes limiting travel is kind of defeating the purpose of what we're trying to achieve. So the Kralwer 3.5-inch coils, they definitely do ride nice. Prior to the Kralwer springs, I did have the Metal Cloak 4.5-inch. I noticed that the Metal Cloaks were a little more firm, whereas the Kralwers definitely give us a little softer ride. So that is a personal preference. Some people like a nice firm ride, some people like it soft. So I'm happy with these springs for now. We'll definitely keep it, and unless I end up going coilovers, which is an entirely different discussion within itself. So the springs are kind of the base of the suspension. We're gonna lift it, springs are what do it. So we're gonna move over to our shocks. Now for shocks, I decided on the Teraflex Falcons, the 3.3s. These are the adjustable shocks. There's a bunch of different settings. So on these Falcons, we actually have multiple adjustments. We have 1, 2, and 3. 1 being the softest, 2 is that middle zone that has micro adjustments, and then 3, which is gonna be the firmest. The reason I decided to go with a shock like this is just because, depending on the terrain, is going to depend on what shock style you want. For example, when we're driving on the road and we just want to cruise down the road and have it nice and soft, we're going to flip it over to that 1 setting. And then when we're out there trying to blast through the desert, going over some big bumps, really fast, high speed stuff, it might be nice to throw it on a stiffer setting so the shocks don't keep bottoming out. The crazy thing about the Teraflex shocks is that the adjustments actually do make a pretty big difference. I've messed around with adjustable shocks in the past, and sometimes you couldn't really tell a difference, honestly. But with these, there is a noticeable difference in between the different settings. Now, my favorite setting on these is going to be the 2.2, which is a little bit towards the softer side. The downside to the JK Teraflex Falcon shocks is that they are a little bit stiff. And you've probably heard that online. It's not horribly stiff, and it's actually something that I do like. Having a stiff shock is, gonna kind of suck a little bit when we're going over a bunch of bumps, but the on-road handling is great. So, and that's kind of why I went with these. I paired up this Jeep with 3-link front and rear, Antirocks. Most people would say that's a crazy combo because both of those are kind of known to have a lot of highway sway. The Jeep is more built for off-roading. On-road characteristics suck. It's not really true, but it could be just because of the shocks. These shocks, while they are a little bit stiff, kind of negate all the bad side effects of having a 3-link. So I am happy with these shocks. They do have a bunch of down travel, 12.3 inches of total travel. That's more than most bolt-on like coil over lift kits. 12.3 inches of travel is a lot, but it also, gets into why I'm dropping that rear coil spring. So as you can tell, the down travel is awesome, which also means we get a bunch of flex. So off-road, our suspension can really articulate. So that leads into the next thing, the anti-rocks. A lot of people will say, oh, anti-rocks are gonna limit your suspension travel. You're leaving your sway bars on, you're not gonna get much flex. With this setup, you guys have seen it, it still flexes amazing. Now, we might have lost maybe 1 inch or 2 inches of, actual wheel articulation, but the trade-off with these is that the off-road stability is just amazing. So in times when you're flexing out and you're off camber, having a set of sway bars connected like the Rockjock Antirocks, it really actually helps off-road. It adds a little stability back to it while still being soft enough to let your wheels travel and articulate. Now, there's a few other things I really liked about it. What I've noticed is that with leaving the front and rear anti-rocks on, or some type of sway bar in general, the Jeep doesn't bounce around as much off-road. Before I added these, I would just disconnect my sway bars up front. But what that means is that the Jeep would bounce around all the time. You go over a couple bumps and the Jeep is just swaying back side to side. You go over a big bump, the whole suspension unloads. It gets kind of crazy, especially when you're trying to drive and hold on, passengers going crazy, flying out. With the anti-rocks, the Jeep is a lot more stable. It kind of slows down all that movement. But the best thing I like about it is that if we're going up a climb and we have a lot of weight towards the rear of the Jeep, if we kind of bounce up, our sway bar is going to kind of stop that upward suspension movement. So here's a prime example. When we were in Windrock wheeling, there was this one spot on Trail 15, got a little bit of momentum, and it is uphill. So we're going uphill, the front tire hits a rock, and it kind of bounces up. Now, if my sway bars were disconnected, the Jeep's front end or the suspension would just want to unload. Now, what that would do is take the weight off the front of the tires, so we might not have that traction. With the anti-rock, the suspension starts to unload a little bit, but the sway bars hold it down so that weight stayed on the front tires. It's definitely a neat feeling, and you can really kind of see it in action. Now, there's a lot of other stuff that you can do for that, limit straps, shocks with different rebound valving. There's a lot to it, but this is very basic stuff, and I don't want to go way too far in depth with it, but it works great. So the shocks, anti-rock, it's a great combo, both on-road and off-road. So let's go into the DIY 3-links. People either love them or they hate them, and I'm not sure why. Sure, I do see both sides of the spectrum. Some people say 3-link, it's gonna be, it's bind free. If you wanna flex, the 3-link design is going to let you flex off-road like crazy, and it does. But the downside to that is the on-road handling can feel really loose. The body can lean a lot. And that's where you kind of have to really be particular on what shocks and sway bars you go with. So if you are running 3-link front and rear where you plan to, it's definitely street drivable. I mean, we have, close to 700 miles on-road driving with this, and I'm completely happy with it. Cassie likes driving it. I know she's inside, and I don't blame her. I'd like for her to come out here and tell you guys, but it rides really good. You can corner hard. It's a great combo, and it's because it all works together. So if you're looking for 3-links, you're definitely gonna have to have at least a front and rear sway bar. Whether they're factory sway bars or Rockjock Antirocks, you need something. I would never recommend removing your rear sway bar with a 3-link. It's just going to be way too loose. So now that we've kind of gone over that, let's talk about the off-road benefits of long arms and 3-links. What I've noticed is that the suspension feels so much better off-road. When we're going up to an obstacle, whether it's a big rock or kind of a ledge, instead of the Jeep just wanting to push into it, the long arms they just kind of want to float over it. It pushes the tire up and over it so much easier than the factory short arms. Now with these long arms, the lower links are much more parallel. There's not a really steep angle from the lift kit, and it does a bunch of stuff for us. It makes our geometry a lot better. For example, climbing over rocks, it hops right over it. It corrects our anti-dive, our anti-squat, and it does a lot of other suspension geometry stuff that I really don't want to get into in this video either. There's a lot of videos online talking about anti-squat, anti-dive, and you know, real quick, what that is. Don't want to go into too much detail. When you smash the gas pedal, anti-squat, if it's a really high value, your Jeep's going to want to rise. If you have a really low value of anti-squat, the Jeep's going to want to dip down. Now, when you have your factory, you know, the factories come set with whatever anti-squat they design, is pretty neutral amount. But once you lift it and those angles start going up, it completely changes that anti-squat. And you know, both off-road and on-road, it really hurts the performance. So when you go with long arms, it brings those angles back down, you know, to the manufacturers, you know, whoever you go with, whether it's Rockcrawler, you know, Metal Cloak, or a DIY option like 7-slot customs. They can really fine-tune exactly what's going to benefit off-road and on-road handling. Now, why did I go with a DIY 3-link? First off, I really like the design of this kit, and secondly, it's affordable. So I like a challenge. I enjoy projects like this, especially knowing that I built it. So it was a great design. It works really well. It flexes amazing. And on-road it drives really nice. There are a few issues with it though. Not issues, but drawbacks. The first thing being the rear lower control arm brackets on the frame. The issue with those is that the ground clearance, you can kind of look at them and be like, man, they sit down really low, they're just gonna drag on rocks. So yes, you might hit them on rocks. Yes, it might stop you a little bit, but overall, out of all the places we've wheeled since I've had these, it's only stopped me about 1 or 2 times. And I don't even know if that was actually what was stopping me. Even if my controller mount wasn't in the way, I don't even know if I would have gotten up it. So that was one thing holding it back, or just one kind of negative side effect of a 3-link like this. Now the reason they actually lowered that mount on the frame is due to the anti-squat design. The 3-link, since it has one single upper, we have to mount it way up on the cross member above our drive shaft. So, oh man, this is gonna get deep, guys. Figuring out anti-squat values is, you know, you have to find your center of gravity, which is usually the top bolt of your bell housing or transmission. That's your center of gravity. You have your axle side separation from the lower control arm mount to the upper, and then you have your values at the frame where they go. Oh man, I didn't really want to get into this, but it's something that needs to be talked about because it's, you know, kind of a good thing on this kit and a bad thing. Now, when we have a lot of axle side separation between our upper and lower, like I said, the 3-link has to have a lot of axle side separation because of the 3-link design. We have a lot of separation here. Now on the frame side, if we raised our lower bracket up to make like a high clearance mount, that is going to change our anti-squat value. Because what it does is these two lines, if you drew them out, we just imagine that our control arms went forever, wherever those intersect and how they kind of correspond with our center of gravity is what's going to give us our anti-squat value, our instant center. There's a lot to it. So let's just imagine right here, that's a good anti-squat value. If I cut that bracket off and raised it up, as you can tell, that point where they would intersect definitely changed a lot. Now, what you could do is cut off both brackets on the axle and frame and kind of raise them both up, play around with the suspension design calculator, get it back in spec, and that's something I might do. I really do want to make a video kind of going more in depth on the anti-squat, you know, roll center, all of, you know, anti-dive in the front, all that stuff. But that's not for this video. For the front, everything's perfect. I have zero complaints. The brackets are tucked nice up in there, goes right into the cross member, and it's foolproof. You know, it's a great design. It's, you know, pretty old style, and it works well. So before I freeze my butt off here, we are doing a giveaway in this video. One thing I recently added was a set of Teraflex brake line anchors. I did get 2 boxes, and I already installed 1 set on my Jeep. We're gonna go over, you know, what these are, how to install them real quick. But first, like I mentioned in the last video, the new way I'm doing giveaways is, you know, people who commented on the last video were automatically entered into a giveaway. You know, you guys have no idea what we're giving away. You know, I just want to give back to those of you that watch the videos, support the channel, and you know, I really appreciate you guys. So the winner of this is randomly selected is ES. So the username is ES. I don't know who that is, what that means, but ES, that's it. The username is ES. If you're watching this video, go down to the comments, leave your email address, and shoot me an email to jkgearandgadgets@gmail.com, and these are yours. So we have a lot more stuff to give away, guys, so stay tuned for that. But leading into the Teraflex brake line anchors. So the reason I got these is that my brake lines, when they were just, you know, sitting there, no flex, no up travel, they're really close to the shocks. Now, if I was to go ahead and flex the Jeep out or have a bunch of up travel, that shock could come down and puncture the brake line, which would really suck. So the best way to kind of get them out of the way is either do some funky zip tie system or go with a Teraflex brake line anchor like this. Install was really easy. All we had to do was undo our lower shock bolt. We're now gonna grab the bolt and put our new brake line anchor through there, put the bolt back in the shock, tighten everything down, stick our brake line through our anchor kit, and zip tie it up. It's a really easy thing to install, and it prevents us from possibly ever having a brake line failure on the trail. Let me check my notes real quick. I want to make sure that I kind of went over everything. Oh, nope, I already know it. The Locked Offroad Hydraulic bump stops. I actually installed these a while back. We did the front and rear, and the reason behind hydraulic bump stops is that, you know, the factory ones are like a foam material. They don't offer too much dampening. You know, when you bottom out your Jeep, whether you're flexing or kind of jumping it, those foam bump stops compress really easy and it bottoms out hard. So I decided to go with a hydraulic setup, front and rear. Now the fronts were really easy to install. We kind of just cut the bump stop pad and they screw right up in there. The hydraulic bump stops are awesome because it's, you know, an extra layer of cushioning before you bottom out. So it kind of slows down that harsh bottoming, whether you're flexing real hard or, like I mentioned, jumping the Jeep. We added a set to the rear as well, just because, you know, if you're doing it in the front, you know, sure, if you jump the Jeep or, you know, you're going really, really fast down the road, if the front's nice and soft, it doesn't help if the bottom keeps, you know, slamming on every bump. So we did the rear. The rear's a little harder. You do have to cut the frame, weld on a bracket plate, and then the bump stops as well. But I'm extremely happy with them. You definitely notice it off-road. When you're flexing a lot, during that up travel, whenever the bump stop actually contacts the axle, you can tell that it slows it down some. And then when we're going pretty fast through some big bumps, it's clearly noticeable because the Jeep isn't like, well, bam, well, bam, well, bam. So my only issue with these is that I do need to adjust the pressure. These come from Locked Offroad, I think anywhere from 150, I want to say it's either 150 or 180 PSI in there. It's nitrogen charged. And it works great for the factory setup, but once I move to the 1-ton axles, when you have all of that extra weight, like these axles are probably 300 pounds more than the factory axles, if probably higher than that. But when all of that weight is trying to come up, that's a lot more than the factory weight. And these bump stops are kind of spec'd to the factory axles. So I'm gonna have to increase these pressures just so there's a little more resistance. And that's something that is also going to change in the future. So overall, they're a great purchase. They really do help. However, it might not be something you need. You know, not everybody likes to do all the high-speed stuff. Maybe you shouldn't jump your Jeep. So that's up to you. Let me grab my list real quick. Dun, dun, dun. Ah, yeah. In regards to the 3-link swap, right after that, we went out to the Powerstop Trail to Sema. First place we hit was Arizona. Very dry, very dusty. My hind joint on the rear upper control arm was not greased enough. So we started off the trip, it sounded good. It got a little dust and dirt in there and it started squeaking like crazy. That's one downside to hind joints, is they can be noisy. So the entire Powerstop Trail to Sema trip, my Jeep was squeaking like crazy. So when we got back here, I finally was able to actually drop the joint or drop the control arm, throw a bunch of grease in there, and it is quiet as a mouse now. We are good to go. And I think that's it. That's it. So overall, how does the suspension do? It does great. It does more than I could ask. There are going to be a few tweaks here and there, and I think I would recommend this, you know, this exact setup to anybody. You know, the on-road and off-road characteristics are amazing. It's nothing too crazy. You know, if you're looking for a nice, really, really soft, squishy ride, this might not be for you just due to the Falcon shocks. You know, we need a stiffer shock when we're moving to 3 links front and rear. However, if you want something that can perform good off-road and on-road and that doesn't completely bust the budget, this is a great setup. You know, I know this is probably a pretty advanced setup, especially since everything was pretty labor intensive installing this. So I'd recommend it, and I think it's time to kind of move on to the next chapter. So I have a lot of videos to make for you guys. I wanted to kind of finish up this project and give you guys a video review of how everything works and how I liked it. So coming up next, it's time to lift the Gladiator. I guarantee you that I don't think any of y'all will actually guess what lift kit we went with, especially the brand. If you do think you know, leave a comment below. I'm betting that none of y'all will guess what brand we're going with. So that's coming up soon. We have a lot of projects for that, for this, the LJ. Thanks for watching, guys. I will see you later. I'm gonna go warm up. Peace.